Hello and welcome to the Module 1 Introduction. So, we're going to call this Instructor Lecture IL1. IL for Instructor Lecture, obviously, and this is the first one. So in this introduction today, we'll talk about defining fine art, a bit of introduction to the Chicano film, the mural, and novel. As you can see on your screen, this is the view you see on the course plan for the class. In the left column we have the module outcomes. In the center column we have what we call activity, which will involve everything from viewing films to reading articles, chapters from a novel, and maybe watching some documentaries at times. And then on the right column there you see assessment. And so this is a way of measuring your knowledge of the module. As you'll see, there is going to be a comprehension assessment and a reflection. And we'll follow the reflection guidelines, which is going to be the same for every reflection you write. It's going to be a page, single-spaced. Okay, so just to start, this class is going to focus primarily on Mexican-American film. And so, as the class is titled Mexican-American Fine Arts Appreciation, we're going to do a little bit of foundation building to prepare ourselves for where we're going to go concerning content. And when you ask someone what is fine art, you're going to get a myriad of responses. You're not always going to get the same response. Generally, people think of art, maybe paintings, as fine art. That's a pretty narrow definition. Some would consider sculpture fine art, and of course I do too. And so we consider all of those things to be fine art, but we are also going to look at other manifestations, cultural manifestations of art in terms of like movies. I know it seems a little bit, different than what you might possibly think when you hear the words fine art. But film is very intentional. Film is also the product of someone's creativity. It's loaded with symbolism. It's loaded with cultural meaning and value. It's a representation of values. I mean, it ticks every single box that any other work of art would tick. I think the reason oftentimes that people don't want to call it fine art is because they think blockbuster cinema, commercialized, go to the movies, eat some popcorn, eat some candy, check out, zone out and just watch a movie for entertainment. But we're not approaching film in that same way. Now, these films sometimes are entertaining, and most of the time are entertaining, and they're good movies. They're great movies. You would watch them anyway. However, some of the films are not as much for our entertainment as they are going to be symbols, cultural symbols that tell us something about the history they're talking, the time period they're trying to represent, and then the time period they were created. So just to kind of clarify the scope that we are going to have for fine art in this class, just as this module is titled, we're looking at Chicano film. We're going to look at some mural artwork by Diego Rivera, Orozco. We're going to even look at some contemporary stuff by a guy who's leading a major mural, even community-driven mural artwork, participation right now here in the 2000s. I think his name is Levi Ponce. But we'll look at him at the very end of the class. And then we're going to also look at, we're going to read a novel throughout this course, which is Bless Me, Ultima. We're also going to watch the film a little bit later when we look at the 1940s representation, because that's when the novel is set. So, mural work, a little bit, not a whole lot. The majority of what we're going to look at, film, movies. And we're also going to read a Mexican-American novel. So, as you can see for activity, there are quite a few readings in this first module. And then we're not actually watching any films in the first module, but we're going to make up for that. Don't worry. There's a lot of films to watch. Let's break down these module outcomes first, and then I'm going to go kind of point by point, the activities, readings, and stuff you're going to do, talk about them a little bit, and then talk about your assessments for this module a little bit, and then that's it. So module outcomes, module outcome, MO, was how we'll designate that. So anytime you see MO somewhere, that means module outcome. So 1.1, meaning we have 4 in this module 1. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. Number 1, upon completion of this module, the student will be able to recognize works of Mexican-American fine art. So what we're going to talk about in these activities with these readings, what you're going to learn, is how to identify and recognize a work of Mexican-American fine art based on how we are going to define Mexican-American fine art. Module Objective 1.2, upon completion of this module, the student will be able to explain the creative process for Chicano filmmakers, artists, and authors. So what's really important here in our study of humanity is being able to understand the creative process. There's something that's wired into what makes us human that drives us to create. And it doesn't matter if it's a painting, a poem, a mural, a sculpture, or a movie, a film. These are part of the creative process. And these films that represent Chicano culture, Mexican-American culture, are products of the creativity of Chicano filmmakers. Now, I have to address a distinction here. So, there are a lot of movies out there that are about Mexican Americans and the Chicano culture, but they're not always made or created by Chicanos. So sometimes they're actually the product of Anglos. So I had to make a choice. I had to decide. Do we consider Anglo-produced films about Chicanos Chicano film? Well, not really. There's some good ones out there, and I had to kind of move some of them off our list because what I really want to focus on, and I really think this is important, is Chicano films made by Chicanos about Chicanos. So we're looking at these as products, creations of fine art by the artist. So in some cases, it's the screenwriter. Some cases, it's the director. Sometimes one person's doing both of those roles. Sometimes it's maybe in the case of a novel was written by a Mexican American, and then it might have been turned into a film by Anglos later, but we would still count that. So in some way, Chicanos are part of the creative process in these films, and that is our focus. That's what we're going to look at. We're going to make sure to look at these as creative products that were made by Chicano filmmakers, artists, authors, screenwriters, in some way. Same thing with the novel, same thing with the mural artwork. In some cases, though, the directors or the creators, they may not actually be Mexican American. They might actually still live in Mexico. So, or they lived in America for a time and they went back to Mexico. It just, how we kind of pin down, and this is really at the core of ethnic studies, especially in the sense of what it means to be Mexican American, to both at the same time be Mexican and then to be American, and then to have this imaginary line that is between these two cultures, these two nations. And we really get into this kind of thinking of how can for lack of a better word or definition, an imaginary line. I mean, we say here's the dividing line, but that wasn't always the dividing line. There was dispute, there was warfare, as we'll see how that border became a border. And can geographic distance of 100 feet make someone less of an ethnicity than they were before? You know what I mean? So the question here is, how do we kind of pin down these artists, these filmmakers, these creative folks who, some of them would consider themselves Mexican rather than Mexican American, but they produced and they did work in America. And so, again, it all sort of boils down to this: how do we understand that kind of cultural identity, that kind of ethnicity? Like, the most simplest way we can define what it means to be Chicano or Mexican American is to say that you are of Mexican blood and you are an American. And this isn't, again, the approach in this class and the point of this class isn't to as much get tangled up in the political side of a lot of this, because in some ways that is important, but in other ways it can distract us, because really what we're interested in is trying to understand what it means to be American, which doesn't mean Anglo at all. I mean, that's one expression. It doesn't mean English speaking primarily, although a lot of Americans, even Mexican Americans, speak English or multiple languages. But cultural identity. In this class, in this sense, this is an American Studies class, so we're looking at what it means to be American and what it means to be Mexican, what it means to be Mexican American, and how that influences art, how that influences film, how that influences the novel. So some of our films that we look at it's kind of difficult to tell if they're Mexican American or if they're Mexican films about the struggles between America to the north and Mexico to the south, and how some of in the earlier times we were defining that border and what it means to have two distinct nations. But before we can even really dive into what it means to be Mexican American, there's an entirely complicated history between the Spanish and the Indian, and the product of that colonialism being the mestizo, which becomes really the majority of what we call the Mexican people. So yeah, it's complicated. So as much as we can, we're trying to keep our focus on the product of people who explicitly identify themselves as Chicano, which means Mexican American, which means Mexican blood, American nationality, a representation of one's roots as well from their homeland, from Mexico, and then in America expressing that through artwork. So it should be fun. That's kind of breaking down what we mean by Module 1.2, Module Outcome 1.2. And then module outcome 1.3, upon completion of this module, the student will be able to explain and apply theories about how Mexican American works of fine art are expressions of Chicano experience and cultural values. And so that starts getting at the core there, the heart of what we're really trying to do, to begin analyzing these films, analyzing this novel, analyzing this mural artwork, and really getting into the nuts and bolts in a critical and analytical way to understand the Chicano experience and how it's represented in that art, and how cultural values, whether they be American values or Mexican American values or Mexican values, how those are represented through the art. And module outcome 1.4, upon completion of this module, the student will be able to evaluate works of Mexican American fine art by applying methods of formal criticism. So what I just said, like that we're going to do, is be able to, apply these theories and explain these ideas. There are certain sort of rules that we have to follow that will give us the tools to evaluate, certain methods that we are going to use for formal criticism. Which brings me to the activity section here on your screen. So if you see the Scholarly Literature Reading 1.1, that is an excellent article that's going to give you, like it says, a panoramic view. So it's not a very long article, but what we mean by Chicano cinema, this author, David R. Maciel, is going to give an overview of almost all the films that are in that narrow category we call Chicano film. We're not going to watch all of the movies that he mentions in this article, but we're going to watch a lot of them, and more than half of the ones he mentions. And there are some that are in this narrow genre of Chicano film studies. There's kind of like the top 10 that just everyone accepts and acknowledges that these are, for lack of a better word, masterpieces of this kind of fine art. They are the best of the best. And so Maciel's article, and that's going to align with module outcome 1.1, 1.2, and 1.4. It's basically going to give you an overview and understanding of the works of art so you can recognize them, in this case the films. It's going to give you the ability to explain this filmmaking process as an expression, as a creative expression of the artist. And then in one module outcome 1.4, that you'll be able to apply methods of formal criticism, in this sense film analysis. Really, what you'll see here in Scholarly Literature Reading 1.2, we're really going to get into the methodology of how to analyze film. So that is a selection from a larger book. It's just the introduction to a larger book on movie analysis. And so we're going to look at film theory, methods, and analysis. And so essentially there's like 3 different ways to approach film. There's the history of the film, then there's the theoretical kind of cultural impact and influence of the film, and then thirdly there's the analytical, the analysis, which kind of implements theory, but you'll see, read that article. And so if you're at this point maybe thinking, how are we going to analyze films? Well, read that chapter. That will explain to you what we mean by movie analysis, which is what we're going to do a lot of in this class. So read that. It aligns with module outcome 1.1, 1.3, and 1.4. Then you're going to read short essay by a scholar, Kenneth Rexroth. Now he's going to make a case for the art of literature. And the reason we're putting this in here is because some people would come along and say, well, Professor Weatherford, you said that literature was fine art and we don't think it is. And I'd say, well, I think it is, because in many ways it's representation of culture, and it's something that's created, and there's technique to producing it, just like anything else that the same scrutiny we would put on any other piece of art that we would call fine art. Literature meets those requirements. And so read through that, and that'll give you an understanding for how we are going to look at the text by Rudolfo Anaya, the Bless Me Ultima, which is a really good book, by the way. I guess I don't know if you've read it or if you've seen the film, but it's the story about a boy growing up in kind of the southwest border, near the border, 1940s, and his grandmother, who is curandero, comes to live with them because she's nearing the end of her life and she's not going to make it ultimately, and so by herself she can't survive, so she comes to live with the family, and everyone thinks she's a witch. If you're familiar at all with curanderos, I mean, that basically means like she was a healer, and so there's a lot of tension and conflict between how people view her. Is she good? Is she bad? It deals with witchcraft and things like that, and how it's to be viewed in light of Catholicism, and so it's a great novel in so many ways. But it's a coming of age story about the boy Antonio, who's the main character, and it's told from his perspective. It's a great novel, and so as you know, I've got a link to the full novel, but I'll also tell you here. I'm probably going to mention this somewhere else. You can get the audiobook on Audible, which is Audible, and that is a part of Amazon. It costs money if you want to buy it, but Audible will give you a trial, which they give you like a credit, and it's free for like 30 days. And so you can use that credit, get the book, cancel your membership before they charge you, and basically you can get the audiobook version, which is excellently narrated. It's a great production. Highly recommend the audiobook. I like the audiobook because you can listen to it while you drive. And I don't know, sometimes sitting down and reading a book, maybe your attention span's not as, designed for that. I'm not really a sit down and read kind of person. I love audiobooks, so that's why I recommend it. So then, after you read the Art of Literature by Kenneth Rexroth, there is a article by Shifra M. Goldman, and it's about the Mexican mural. And she's going to address some of the mural artists that we're going to talk about in here. But her whole point is, how can we use it as an educational tool? How can we use mural art as, something to educate others? And she addresses how we need like a historical framework for it. And not all mural art is historical, although it contains some historical elements, but it tells of the culture. It tells of the what life was like for those who created it, and the themes that are represented. Great stuff. If you've never studied any Mexican or Mexican American mural art, it's just fascinating. Great stuff. And then again, as I said, the novel. So novel reading number 1 is going to be the introduction to the book, and then the chapters or sections are uno, dos, and tres, so it's in Spanish there. But so go ahead and read the first 3. There's 21 chapters, so we'll not really be reading this book in the 8th module. in this class. So just kind of think, we have 7 modules, so 3 chapters per module, more or less. I mean, we've got the introduction this time, but generally it'll be 3 chapters from the novel for the first 7 modules, and then in module 8 we're going to focus more on the end of the term coursework rather than you spending time working on reading the novel. You'll be done before then, and then you'll also have opportunity to write a book review on this novel. And then our very first discussion is discussion 1.1, and you are going to introduce yourself. Why did you decide to take this class? How do we define Mexican American fine art? And why is cultural and ethnic representation important in films? So the proof is, the truth is, rather, that when we see a film, there is an attempt to represent the characters in a certain light, in a certain way. That is intentional. And sometimes those characters are laden with stereotypes, but why? And is that harmful? And if it is harmful, talk about that a little bit. Like, what's the ideal representation for a Mexican American in a film? What's the ideal representation for any, minority? Like, it matters to some degree, and so I want you to kind of wrestle with that idea, talk about it some. Then, as you see in the right column, assessment. And comprehension assessment is just kind of another way of saying, module quiz. And you're going to be quizzed over stuff that I said in this video, in this lecture, and then you'll also pull from the readings 1.1 through 1.4, the novel reading as well. So everything is fair game, and that's typically going to be the case for your comprehension assessments. And then reflection number 1, we're going to write 1 page, single-spaced, size 12 font, Times New Roman, 1 page reflection, no more than 1 page. I don't ever want more than 1 page single-spaced, just 1 page, please. But you're going to reflect on the cultural differences, and when you read the novel, this will make sense. The cultural differences between the people of the Luna versus the people of the Llano. And this is an important topic in the novel, and so you're going to kind of compare and contrast there a little bit. What do each of these cultures represent symbolically by their names? And there's, you'll find in the text where this is discussed. And who in the family belongs to which group, and how has this impacted Antonio's family, and why has it impacted the family? And so that's module 1. And so as a rule, everything is due at the end of the module. So, at 11:59 on the very last day of the module, any assessments or discussions for that module will be due. I mean, obviously all the readings need to have been done. All the film watching needs to have been done. So it depends on the format of this course, because sometimes we teach it in, the 16-week format, but it might also be condensed down into a 5-week format, even as small as a 3-week format if it's a mini-master term. So, depending on what you'll know when you watch this video, what course you have taken and how long it is. But it's probably a 16-week course the majority of the time. But, like I said, we offer it year-round, so you could very well be taking this in a 5-week summer course or 3-week mini-term course. So that is all for Module 1, and if you ever have questions, comments, or concerns, you can reach me using the contact information in the syllabus. All right, looking forward to all that lies ahead. Good luck.